In the echoing halls of Westbrook Academy, where children of fortune flaunted designer backpacks and compared vacation homes, 11-year-old Mason Collins clutched his frayed second-hand jacket closer as a circle of sneering classmates closed. In around him, their cruel laughter slicing through the air like shards of broken glass. The familiar ritual of humiliation had begun again, another lunch period where Mason's free meal voucher and worn clothing made him an irresistible target for the wealthy elite, whose parents' generous donations had secured not only their children's enrollment, but also an unspoken immunity from consequences that had allowed their torment to flourish unchecked for months. What these privileged tormentors didn't realize as they escalated their cruel game was that Principal Eleanor Wright had silently turned the corner, witnessing their behavior with her own eyes for the first time. A moment that would trigger a chain of events that would shake Westbrook Academy to its very foundations and force an entire community to confront the toxic culture they had allowed to fester beneath a veneer of prestige and privilege. If you believe that true character has nothing to do with wealth and that every child deserves dignity regardless of their economic circumstances, please subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us all that justice sometimes arrives in unexpected moments that change lives forever. Mason Collins had mastered the art of strategic invisibility at Westbrook Academy. He knew which hallways to avoid between classes, which bathroom stalls provided safe refuge during lunch periods, and how to hunch his shoulders just enough to minimize his profile without appearing obviously afraid. 6 months at the prestigious private school had taught him that attention of any kind was dangerous. "Nice shoes, Goodwill," Zachary Prescott sneered as Mason slipped into his seat for first period math, deliberately placing his foot in Mason's path to trip him. "Did your mom find them in the dumpster behind the restaurant where she works?" Mason caught himself on the edge of his desk, ignoring the scattered snickers from Zachary's loyal entourage. He'd learned that responding only made things worse. Zachary Prescott, with his perfectly styled blonde hair and cashmere sweaters, seemed to exist in a different universe than Mason, one where ski trips to Aspen were casual weekend plans, and where losing an expensive smartphone meant simply asking Daddy to buy the newest model. Mr. Harrison, their math teacher, entered the classroom and the taunting subsided temporarily. Mason focused intently on the equations appearing on the board, his one consolation being that he consistently scored at the top of every class. Academics were his sanctuary, the one area where family money couldn't buy success. But academic excellence only seemed to intensify the resentment directed his way. "Pencils down," Mr. Harrison announced after their pop quiz. "I'll be grading these before tomorrow, though I have a feeling our resident scholarship student has once again set the curve." Mason winced at the casual identification that marked him as different. Even well-meaning teachers didn't understand how their comments reinforced his outsider status. "Teacher's pet," someone whispered from behind. "Probably cheats." The morning proceeded with its usual obstacles. In science class, his lab partner accidentally spilled chemicals on Mason's notebook, destroying 2 weeks of meticulous notes. During physical education, his gym clothes mysteriously disappeared from his locker, forcing him to participate in his regular clothes and earn a demerit for being unprepared. Lunch period was always the worst. The Westbrook cafeteria resembled an upscale restaurant more than a school lunchroom, with its mahogany tables and healthy, chef-prepared options. Mason's free lunch voucher, bright yellow and impossible to conceal, might as well have been a neon sign announcing his financial status. "Shouldn't there be a separate section for the charity cases?" Zachary loudly wondered, as Mason passed their table, his 5 friends laughing on cue. "I mean, my dad pays enough in tuition to cover like 10 of him." Mason found his usual isolated corner, keeping his head down as he ate quickly. The food at Westbrook was admittedly amazing, far better than the simple meals his mother managed to prepare between shifts. He sometimes saved parts of his lunch to bring home, though he told his mom he just wasn't hungry when she asked why he was eating again after school. "Mind if I join you?" Mason looked up to find Mrs. Winters, his English teacher, standing by his table with her lunch tray. Unlike most Westbrook faculty who seemed to come from the same privileged background as their students, Mrs. Winters had a warmth about her that suggested she understood what it meant to be an outsider. "Sure," Mason mumbled, both grateful for it, the company, and anxious about being seen with a teacher. Association with authority figures only provided more ammunition for Zachary's taunts. "I wanted to talk to you about your essay on To Kill a Mockingbird," Ms. Winters said, settling across from him. "It was exceptional, Mason. Your analysis of social inequality in the novel was remarkably insightful for someone your age." Mason felt a rare flicker of pride. "Thanks, I really connected with that book. I can see why," she said gently. "You have a unique perspective that many of your classmates lack. That's a gift, even if it doesn't always feel like one." Before Mason could respond, a burst of laughter erupted from Zachary's table, loud enough to make clear it was directed at them. Mrs. Winters glanced over with a frown. "Have those boys been giving you trouble, Mason?" she asked, lowering her voice. "It's nothing," he said automatically, the denial practiced and perfect. "I'm fine." Ms. Winters didn't look convinced, but she didn't press the issue. "You know you can talk to me anytime, right?" or to Principal Wright. "No one should have to deal with bullying alone." Mason nodded, though they both knew he wouldn't say anything. Complaints meant escalation. Escalation meant potential retaliation. And retaliation from boys whose parents practically owned the school would only make his life more unbearable. After school, Mason walked the 1.5 miles to the bus stop beyond Westbrook's manicured grounds. His mother had insisted he not list their actual address on his enrollment forms, afraid that knowledge of their apartment in the rundown Eastern District would somehow jeopardize his scholarship. So he pretended to live with an uncle in a more respectable neighborhood, which meant a longer commute but preserved the illusion that he almost belonged among Westbrook's elite. His mother, Diane Collins, wouldn't be home until after her evening shift at the hospital where she worked. As a nursing assistant, their tiny 2-bedroom apartment would be empty for several hours, giving Mason time to complete his homework and prepare a simple dinner. The solitude was actually a relief after days spent navigating Westbrook's social minefield. He pulled out his math textbook, not the glossy hardcover his classmates had, but a photocopied version the school provided for financial aid students to use at home. Despite the indignity of the smudged pages, Mason lost himself in the elegant certainty of equations, where right answers had nothing to do with designer clothes or European vacations. At 8:30, he heard his mother's key in the lock. Diane. Collins entered, looking exhausted, her scrubs wrinkled from a 12-hour shift, but her face brightened at the sight of her son. "Hey, smarty pants," she greeted him, dropping a kiss on his forehead. "How was school today?" "Fine," Mason answered, with his standard response. "Got an A on my history test." "That's my boy," Diane beamed with genuine pride. "I always knew you had your father's brains." Mason smiled, though mentions of his father, a surgeon who had abandoned them when Mason was a toddler, always brought mixed feelings. His father's absence had left them financially struggling, but it had also cemented the unbreakable bond between mother and son. "Anything else happen today?" Diane asked, warming up the plate of pasta Mason had prepared. Mason hesitated, the weight of the daily humiliations pressing against his chest. For a moment, he considered telling her everything about Zachary's taunts, the accidentally destroyed notes, the constant reminders that he didn't belong. But then he remembered his mother's face the day he'd received the Westbrook scholarship. How she'd cried with joy, telling him this was his chance to break the cycle, to have opportunities she never had. How she'd taken on extra shifts to pay for his uniform and school supplies. "Nothing special," he said instead. "Just a normal day." As he watched his mother eat the simple meal he'd prepared, Mason renewed his private vow. He would endure whatever Westbrook threw at him. For her sacrifice, for their future, for the chance to become the doctor he dreamed of being, someone who could one day ensure his mother never had to work another double shift again. The day that would change everything at Westbrook Academy began like any other. Mason arrived early, as was his habit, to spend some quiet time in the library before classes started. The librarian, Mrs. Chen, was one of the few staff members who treated him no differently than the wealthy students, and the book-lined space provided a temporary haven from Zachary Prescott's relentless campaign of torment. "Morning, Mason," Mrs. Chen greeted him with a warm smile. "I set aside that book on medical pioneers you asked about." "Thanks," Mason replied, genuinely grateful as he accepted the thick biography. His interest in medicine had become nearly obsessive over the past year, a North Star guiding him through Westbrook's hostile environment. Every taunt endured was one step closer to medical school, to a future where he could support his mother and help people like her who worked themselves to exhaustion for minimal pay and little respect. The morning passed with its usual low grade, misery. A deliberately spilled coffee on his math homework, whispered commentary about his faded uniform pants, the carefully orchestrated isolation at group work tables where no one would partner with the charity case. By lunchtime, Mason was already emotionally exhausted, but the worst was yet to come. He entered the cafeteria cautiously, yellow meal voucher clutched in his hand, eyes scanning for Zachary and his followers. Not seeing them immediately, he allowed himself to hope. Today might be one of the rare days when they found another target, or were absent for some extracurricular activity. Mason collected his meal, herb-roasted chicken with seasonal vegetables, the kind of lunch that still amazed him after years of public school cafeteria food, and headed toward his usual, isolated corner table. He was halfway there when he spotted Zachary entering the cafeteria with his entourage, all wearing identical expressions of predatory anticipation. Too late to retreat. Mason quickened his pace, hoping to reach the relative safety of his corner before they intercepted him. He was 3 tables away when he felt a foot extend into his path. Despite anticipating the move, the sudden obstacle sent him stumbling forward, his tray tilting precariously. "Oops," came Zachary's mock innocent voice. "Didn't see you there, Collins. Maybe if your clothes weren't the same color as the floor." Mason managed to regain his balance without spilling his lunch, a small victory that seemed to irritate Zachary. The wealthy boy's eyes narrowed as he assessed his target, looking for a new angle of attack. "Hey, Collins," Zachary said, raising his voice to ensure others would hear, "is it true your mom cleans bedpans at County General? Must be why you always smell like disinfectant." Mason's cheeks burned with anger and humiliation. His mother's work as a nursing assistant was honorable, necessary, and far more meaningful than anything Zachary's hedge fund father did. But he knew defending her would only provide more ammunition. "Nothing to say?" Zachary continued, his audience, a fellow rich kids watching with cruel anticipation. "Maybe you're embarrassed about living in that roach-infested apartment complex on East Side. Yeah, we know that Uncle's story is complete BS." The revelation that they knew where he really lived sent a chill through Mason. He'd been so careful to maintain that fiction, walking the extra distance to a different bus stop every day. "My dad has investigators who can find out anything about anyone," Zachary boasted, clearly enjoying Mason's discomfort. He wanted to make sure they weren't giving scholarships to just any trash off the street. Mason stood frozen, lunch tray still in, his trembling hands as Zachary rose from his seat and approached. The cafeteria had grown quieter, other students sensing a confrontation brewing and turning to watch. "You don't belong here, Collins," Zachary said, voice dropping to a menacing tone as he invaded Mason's personal space. "Westbrook is for people, with class, with breeding, not charity cases whose mothers—" "That's enough, Prescott," came a quiet voice from a nearby table. To Mason's surprise, Lily Chen, daughter of a tech industry CEO and one of Westbrook's most popular girls, had stood up. "You're being a jerk." Zachary looked momentarily thrown by this unexpected interruption, especially from someone within his social circle. But he quickly recovered, his expression hardening. "Stay out of this, Lily. Just because your dad made some app doesn't mean you get to lecture me about Westbrook traditions." Lily opened her mouth to respond, but Zachary had already turned his attention back to Mason, apparently deciding to escalate rather than retreat. With deliberate malice, he reached out and knocked Mason's tray upward, sending chicken, vegetables, and raspberry vinaigrette dressing cascading over Mason's white uniform shirt, the only one he owned. "Looks like you need a bib," Zachary laughed, as his friends erupted in cruel appreciation. "Maybe they'll add those to the scholarship package next year." Mason stood there, food dripping down his once white shirt, the stains spreading across the cotton in a hideous pink-purple bloom. The cafeteria had gone completely silent now, the moment crystallizing into the kind of public humiliation that would become school legend. And then, from the cafeteria entrance, came a voice that cut through the silence like a knife. "Mr. Prescott, every..." Head turned to see Principal Eleanor Wright standing in the doorway, her normally composed expression replaced by one of cold fury. In her tailored charcoal suit and with her steel gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, she projected an authority that immediately altered the atmosphere in the room. "My office. Now," she commanded, her voice leaving no room for argument. "And Mr. Collins, please come with me as well." As Zachary's smug expression faltered, Mason became aware of something he'd never seen before: uncertainty in his tormentor's eyes. For the first time, Zachary Prescott looked genuinely concerned about consequences. Principal Wright turned to the cafeteria at large. "Everyone else, continue your lunch. Ms. Chen," she addressed Lily, who still stood at her table. "Would you please join us as a witness to these events?" As Mason followed the principal out of the cafeteria, painfully conscious of the food stain spreading across his shirt and the whispers erupting behind him, he felt a strange mixture of dread and vindication. Someone in authority had finally seen what happened to him every day. Someone had finally stepped in, but experience had taught Mason to be wary of hope. Zachary's father was Richard Prescott, chairman of Westbrook's Board of Trustees and the Academy's most generous donor. The Prescott family name adorned the science building, the auditorium, and the Olympic-sized swimming pool. In Mason's experience, money always won in the end. But as he caught the genuine outrage in Principal Wright's expression, he allowed himself to wonder if maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. Principal Eleanor Wright had been at Westbrook Academy for less than a year. At 53, with 25 years in education behind her, she had accepted the prestigious position with clear-eyed awareness of the challenges it would present. Westbrook wasn't just a school. It was an institution, a pipeline to the Ivy League, and a bastion of old money and established power in the region. As she sat behind her imposing mahogany desk, regarding the two boys and Lily Chen, Eleanor felt the weight of her position acutely. Zachary Prescott lounged in his chair with practiced nonchalance, though she detected nervousness beneath his privileged facade. Mason Collins sat stiffly upright, food stains drying on his uniform shirt, his expression carefully neutral despite the humiliation he'd just endured. Lily Chen perched between them, her straight posture reflecting her private school pedigree, but her eyes showing compassion as she glanced at Mason. "Miss Chen, please tell me what you witnessed in the cafeteria," Eleanor began, her tone professional. "But warm?" Lily didn't hesitate. "Zachary was taunting Mason about his mother and where he lives. When I told him to stop, he deliberately knocked Mason's lunch all over him." "That's not how it happened," Zachary interrupted, indignation coloring his voice. "It was an accident. Collins bumped into me, and I just reacted." Eleanor fixed him with a steady gaze. "Mr. Prescott, I was standing in the doorway for quite some time. I saw you extend your foot to trip Mr. Collins when he walked past. I heard your comments about his mother and his home. And I saw you deliberately push his tray up into his chest. There was nothing accidental about your actions." Zachary's confident expression faltered. Being caught in a lie by the principal herself left little room for his usual manipulations. "Miss Chen, thank you for speaking up in the cafeteria and for providing your account. You may return to lunch now." After Lily departed, Eleanor turned her attention to Mason. "Mr. Collins, I'd like you to go to the nurse's office. There's a spare uniform shirt there you can change into. Please return here afterward." Once Mason had left, she focused fully on Zachary. This behavior is completely unacceptable at Westbrook Academy or any educational institution. Bullying, harassment, and physical aggression violate our student code of conduct and merit serious consequences. Zachary shifted uncomfortably. It was just a joke. Collins takes everything too seriously. Besides, everyone does it. Everyone. "Does it?" Eleanor repeated, her voice taking on an edge. "Is that supposed to excuse your behavior, Mr. Prescott?" "No." "But," Zachary began, then switched tactics. "My father makes significant contributions to Westbrook. He's the board chairman. I think he should be involved in any disciplinary decisions." The implied threat wasn't subtle. Eleanor had indeed met Richard Prescott during her hiring process, a man whose handshake was firm, whose smile never reached his eyes, and whose questions had made it clear that the principal served at the pleasure of the board he controlled. "Rest assured, Mr. Prescott, your father will be informed of today's events," she replied evenly. "For now, you will report to in-school suspension for the remainder of the day, while I determine appropriate consequences." After Zachary had been escorted to the suspension room by the vice principal, Eleanor sat alone, contemplating the situation. What she'd witnessed was clearly not an isolated incident, but the culmination of an ongoing pattern. The calculated nature of Zachary's torment, the practiced way he'd established his dominance, the public humiliation designed for maximum effect. These spoke of habitual behavior, not a momentary lapse in judgment. Yet, in her short tenure at Westbrook, she'd never received reports about bullying involving Zachary Prescott or Mason Collins. Why had no teachers or staff members noticed? Or if they had noticed, why hadn't they intervened? Eleanor opened Mason's student file on her computer. His academic record was impeccable. Straight A's across all subjects, glowing comments from teachers about his work ethic and intelligence. He was at Westbrook on a full academic scholarship, one of only 3 students in the entire middle school who didn't come from wealth. Next, she pulled up Zachary's file. Good, but not exceptional grades. Multiple teacher comments about leadership potential, coupled with concerns about focus and respect for others. No formal disciplinary actions despite these notes, which struck Eleanor as unusual given the pattern they suggested. A knock at her door interrupted her review. "Come in," she called. Mason Collins entered, now wearing a clean white shirt that was slightly too large for his thin frame. "You wanted to see me again, Principal Wright?" "Yes." "Please sit down," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "Mason, I want to apologize for what happened today. What Zachary Prescott did was completely unacceptable, and I want you to know it will be addressed seriously." Mason's expression revealed surprise followed by skepticism. "Thank you, but you don't believe anything will actually happen," Eleanor finished for him, understanding his hesitation. "Because Zachary's father is Richard Prescott." Mason nodded cautiously. "I'd like to ask you something important, Mason, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Has this type of behavior from Zachary and his friends been ongoing?" Mason stared at his hands. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes." "How long has it been happening?" "Since I started here." 6 months. Eleanor felt a sinking sensation in her stomach. "Have you told anyone? Any teachers or staff members?" Mason shook his head. "It wouldn't make any difference. Zachary's dad basically owns the school." The resignation in his voice troubled Eleanor deeply. "Has anyone else witnessed these incidents? Other students or teachers?" "Everyone sees it," Mason said simply. "Most. Kids either join in or look away. Some teachers notice, I think. Ms. Winters tried to talk to me about it once." "And what did you tell her?" "That everything was fine." He looked up finally, meeting Eleanor's eyes. "Complaining just makes it worse. And I can't lose my scholarship. My mom worked so hard to keep me here. The education is worth dealing with the other stuff." Eleanor felt a surge of both admiration for the boy's resilience and anger at the system that had forced such a choice upon him. "No education should come at the cost of your dignity and safety, Mason. That's not a trade-off. Any child should have to make." After Mason left, Eleanor sat at her desk for a long time, contemplating her next steps. As a new principal, still establishing her authority, taking on the Prescott family represented a significant risk to her career. Richard Prescott didn't just chair the board. His family's foundation provided nearly 20% of Westbrook's annual operating budget. Crossing him would require ironclad evidence and unwavering resolve. Yet the alternative, allowing Zachary's behavior to continue unchecked, was professionally and morally unacceptable. If Westbrook truly aimed to prepare students for leadership roles in society, what message did it send when wealth and connections shielded some from the consequences of their actions? Eleanor picked up her phone and dialed the number for Andrea Winters, Mason's English teacher. "Andrea, I need to speak with you about Mason Collins and Zachary Prescott. Can you come to my office during your planning period?" As she began systematically contacting other teachers who had both boys in their classes, Eleanor knew she was potentially igniting a controversy that could end her tenure at Westbrook Academy. But watching Mason endure that public humiliation had crystallized something she'd sensed since arriving. Beneath its polished veneer of academic excellence, Westbrook harbored a toxic culture that privileged wealth over character, status over kindness. If addressing that meant confronting Richard Prescott and risking her position, so be it. Some principles were worth fighting for, even at significant personal cost. Richard Prescott arrived at Westbrook Academy in a gleaming black Range Rover, his custom-tailored suit and confident stride announcing his status before he spoke a word. As chairman of the board and the Academy's most generous benefactor, he was accustomed to deferential treatment from faculty and administration alike. The urgent call from Principal Wright's office about his son had been an unwelcome interruption to his busy schedule, but one he intended to resolve quickly and decisively. Eleanor watched through her office window as Prescott strode across the courtyard, noting how staff members practically leapt from his path. She had spent the previous evening preparing for this confrontation, reviewing Westbrook's anti-bullying policies, gathering teacher statements, and steeling herself for the likely outcome. A powerful man unaccustomed to being challenged. "Mr. Prescott," she greeted him with professional courtesy as he entered her office. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." Richard Prescott settled his imposing frame into the visitor's chair, declining her offer of coffee with a dismissive wave. "Let's not waste time on pleasantries, Principal Wright. I understand there was some minor incident involving Zachary yesterday. I'm sure we can clear this up quickly." Eleanor noted his characterization, minor incident, and the assumption that her role was to clear this up rather than address a serious disciplinary issue. She sat behind her desk, maintaining eye contact with the intimidating figure before her. "I'm afraid what occurred was far from minor, Mr. Prescott. Your son deliberately humiliated another student publicly, destroyed his uniform, and made cruel remarks about his family's economic circumstances. More concerning, my investigation suggests this was not an isolated incident, but part of an ongoing pattern of targeted bullying." Prescott's expression hardened. "Boys will be boys, Principal Wright. These little hierarchies establish themselves naturally in any school environment. Part of growing up is learning to navigate social dynamics. Bullying is not a natural social dynamic, Mr. Prescott. It's a harmful behavior that Westbrook's Code of Conduct explicitly prohibits. Eleanor opened a folder on her desk. I've spoken with 7 teachers who have observed Zachary targeting Mason Collins repeatedly over the past 6 months. None of them filed formal reports, which is a separate issue I'm addressing, but their accounts are consistent and troubling. Collins, that's the scholarship student? Prescott's tone made the word scholarship sound like a contagious disease. Perhaps he's simply not suited to Westbrook's environment. Not everyone belongs in an elite institution. Eleanor felt a flare of anger but kept her voice measured. Mason Collins has a perfect academic record despite the hostile environment he's encountered. His work ethic and intellect exemplify the qualities Westbrook claims to value. What he lacks is financial privilege, which should never determine how a child is treated in an educational setting. Prescott leaned forward, his manner shifting from dismissive to vaguely threatening. Principal Wright, you're relatively new to Westbrook. Perhaps you don't fully understand our community's traditions. The Prescott family has supported this academy for 3 generations. My influence extends beyond these walls to the highest levels of the educational establishment. The implied threat hung in the air between them. Eleanor had anticipated this moment, the reminder of his power, the suggestion that her career prospects depended on her flexibility in this matter. I'm well aware of your family's contributions to Westbrook, Mr. Prescott. They're significant and appreciated. However, they don't exempt Zachary from the standards of behavior we expect from all students. Prescott's laugh held no humor. Let's be practical. What exactly are you proposing as a resolution to this? Misunderstanding? Eleanor slid a document across the desk. This outlines the disciplinary measures I've determined are appropriate: a 3-day suspension, a formal apology to Mason Collins, and mandatory sessions with our school counselor to address Zachary's behavior. Prescott didn't touch the paper. Unacceptable. A suspension would affect Zachary's permanent record. Besides, the Prescott Charity Gala is this weekend, and Zachary is expected to attend with the family. I'm not negotiating, Mr. Prescott. These are the consequences for Zachary's actions as outlined in our student handbook. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. The alternative would be a disciplinary hearing before the full board, where all evidence would be presented publicly. A dangerous glint appeared in Prescott's eyes. Careful, Principal Wright. The board serves at my pleasure, and so do you. Actually, the board serves Westbrook Academy and its mission to develop students of character and intellect, Eleanor corrected him. As for my position, I'm prepared to accept whatever consequences come from upholding our institution's stated values. Prescott studied her for a long moment, seemingly reassessing his approach. You know, I vetted you personally for this position. Your credentials were impressive, your references impeccable. I had high hopes for your tenure here. He sighed, theatrically. It would be a shame to see your promising career derailed over such a trivial matter. There's nothing trivial about a child being systematically tormented because of his economic circumstances, Eleanor replied. And if standing against that constitutes career suicide at Westbrook, perhaps this isn't the institution I believed it to be. Prescott's expression darkened. You're making a serious mistake. The last principal who challenged my authority found himself unemployable in any reputable private school. Is that really the hill you want to die on, defending some charity case? His name is Mason Collins, Eleanor said quietly but firmly. And yes, this is precisely the principle worth defending. Every child at Westbrook deserves dignity and safety, regardless of their family's financial status or influence. Rising abruptly, Prescott buttoned his jacket with deliberate precision. Zachary will not be suspended. He will not be seeing a counselor, and he certainly will not be apologizing to a scholarship student. If you pursue this matter, I'll call an emergency board meeting to review your continued employment. Eleanor remained seated, maintaining her professional composure despite her racing heart. "You have that right, Mr. Prescott. In the meantime, Zachary's suspension begins tomorrow. I've already notified his teachers." Prescott moved toward the door, then turned back with a cold smile. "You know, there's an old saying in business, never start a war you can't win. You would do well to remember that, Principal Wright." After he departed, Eleanor released a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The confrontation had gone largely as expected, though Prescott's naked threats had been more explicit than she'd anticipated. He clearly wasn't accustomed to being refused, especially by someone he viewed as his subordinate. Opening her laptop, Eleanor began composing an email to the full board of trustees, documenting the incident, her investigation findings, and the disciplinary measures implemented. She had no illusions about the likely outcome. Richard Prescott controlled enough votes to terminate her contract, but she was determined to create a paper trail that would make it clear exactly why she was being removed. As she typed, Eleanor thought of Mason Collins's resigned expression when he described the ongoing bullying. No child should have to accept humiliation as the price of education. Even if this battle cost her career at Westbrook, perhaps it would force a long overdue conversation about the toxic culture that had been allowed to flourish beneath the school's prestigious facade. Some principles were worth fighting for, even at significant personal cost. This, Eleanor was certain, was one of them. Mason stared at his reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror of their small apartment, examining the fading bruise on his shoulder, a souvenir from being slammed into a locker the previous week by one of Zachary's friends. The cafeteria incident had occurred 3 days ago, and the consequences had been swift, though not in the way Principal Wright had likely intended. Zachary Prescott was indeed absent from school, but rumors suggested he was enjoying an extended weekend at his family's lake house rather than serving an actual suspension. Meanwhile, Mason had endured intensified hostility from Zachary's friends, who blamed him for their leader's temporary removal. "You got Prescott suspended," Jason Miller had hissed while shoving past him in the hallway. "Hope you enjoy what's coming when he gets back." Mason splashed cold water on his face, trying to wash away the fatigue that seemed permanently etched beneath his eyes. Sleep had become elusive, his nights filled with anxiety about returning to Westbrook each morning. Even his usual academic focus was suffering. Yesterday, he'd earned a B+ on a science quiz, still respectable, but below his typical perfect. "Scores! Mason," his mother's voice called from the kitchen. "Breakfast is ready, honey?" Diane Collins had the rare luxury of a morning shift today, which meant she could actually see her son off to school instead of leaving before dawn. Mason quickly pulled on his uniform shirt, buttoning it to hide the bruise, and forced a smile onto his face before joining her. "Eggs and toast," Diane announced proudly, setting a plate before him. "I had time to go to the store yesterday." Mason knew what those simple words represented. His mother had likely sacrificed sleep to shop after her evening shift. The realization made his throat tighten with a complicated mixture of love and guilt. "Looks great, Mom," he managed, taking a bite despite his non-existent appetite. Diane studied him as she sipped her coffee, maternal intuition detecting what Mason tried so hard to conceal. "You've been quiet lately. Everything okay at school?" Mason nodded automatically, the lie so practiced it required no thought. But this morning something inside him faltered. Perhaps it was exhaustion wearing down his defenses, or perhaps the principal's intervention had cracked his carefully constructed facade. "Actually," he began, then hesitated, uncertain how to continue. How could he explain the daily torment without revealing the extent of what he'd been hiding? How could he burden his already overworked mother with problems she couldn't solve? Diane set down her coffee cup, giving him her full attention. "What is it, Mason? You know you can tell." "Me, anything." The genuine concern in her eyes broke something in Mason. Words suddenly poured out, unplanned and unstoppable. There's this group of kids at school that they don't like me because I'm on scholarship. They say things about us, about where we live, about you." Diane's expression shifted from concern to shock to a contained anger. "How long has this been happening?" "Since I started," Mason admitted, staring at his plate. "It got worse lately. The principal saw some of it the other day and suspended Zachary Prescott. He's the main one. His dad's the board chairman." "Prescott? Richard Prescott's son?" Diane's recognition of the name surprised Mason. "I've taken care of his mother at the hospital. Elaine Prescott. She has a standing weekly cosmetic procedure." This unexpected connection between their worlds momentarily derailed Mason's confession. "You've met his family?" "Not him, just his wife." Diane reached across the table to take Mason's hand. "Why didn't you tell me about this bullying, Mason? 6 months you've been dealing with this alone?" The question unleashed emotions Mason had suppressed for too long. "Because you work so hard to keep me at Westbrook. You're always telling me what a great opportunity it is, how it will help me get into a good college, become a doctor someday. I didn't want to—" His voice broke. "I didn't want to seem ungrateful." Diane's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Mason, being grateful for an opportunity doesn't mean you have to endure abuse. No education is worth your happiness or safety." "But Westbrook is the best school," Mason protested, "and the scholarship covers everything. We could never afford—" "Stop," Diane interrupted firmly. "Listen to me. You are worth more than any prestige that school offers. Your dignity matters more than any advantages it might provide for college." Mason felt simultaneous relief at finally sharing his burden and fresh anxiety about what might come next. "What are we going to do? If I leave Westbrook, I'll lose the scholarship. Public school wouldn't prepare me for pre-med programs the same way." Diane considered this, her expression thoughtful. "First, we're going to talk to this principal. What's her name?" "Principal Wright. Eleanor Wright. I want to hear exactly what she witnessed and what she's doing about it. Then we'll decide our next steps." Diane squeezed his hand. "Together, Mason, you don't have to handle this alone anymore." On the bus ride to Westbrook, Mason replayed the morning's conversation in his mind. His mother's reaction had been both exactly what he'd expected: fierce protectiveness and surprising in its restraint. He'd half anticipated her marching directly to Westbrook to confront Zachary Prescott herself. Instead, she'd called the hospital to request an emergency personal day, promising Mason she would schedule a meeting with Principal Wright immediately. "Education is important," she told him before he left, "but how you're treated as a human being matters more. Never forget that." As Mason walked through Westbrook's imposing front gates, he felt strangely lighter despite the uncertainty ahead. Sharing his secret burden had provided relief he hadn't known he needed. Yet new worries quickly replaced the old. What if his mother's involvement made things worse? What if the Prescott's influence was too powerful to overcome? What if he ended up having to leave Westbrook after all? Lily Chen was waiting by his locker, a surprise that momentarily distracted him from his spiraling concerns. Since standing up for him in the cafeteria, she had acknowledged him in the hallways with friendly nods, but they hadn't actually spoken. "Hey," she said as he approached. "I just wanted to check if you're okay. Jason and the others have been saying some pretty nasty things since Zachary left." Mason blinked, unused to such direct concern from one of Westbrook's elite. "I'm fine," he answered automatically, then amended, "Well, not really fine, but managing." Lily nodded, seeming to understand the distinction. "Zachary's dad is on the warpath. My father's on the board, and he said Mr. Prescott called an emergency meeting for tomorrow night. Something about administrative overreach and proper channels for discipline." The information confirmed Mason's fears about retaliation against Principal Wright. She was just doing her job, he said, feeling a surge of guilt. "Enforcing the rules that are supposed to apply to everyone." "I supposed to is the key phrase at Westbrook," Lily replied with unexpected cynicism. "Anyway, I just wanted you to know that not everyone thinks like Zachary." What he did was cruel and stupid. As Lily walked away, Mason was struck by the strange, new reality he found himself in. His carefully maintained isolation had been shattered. For better or worse, he was now visible at Westbrook. Principal Wright had seen him. His mother knew the truth. Even Lily Chen, daughter of tech royalty, had sought him out to express support. Visibility brought vulnerability, but also potential allies. As Mason headed to his first class, he realized he'd reached a crossroads. He could continue as before, head down, enduring whatever came his way in silence. Or he could stand up for himself, for Principal Wright, who had risked her position to defend him, for the principle that wealth shouldn't determine a person's worth or how they were treated. The choice was terrifying, but for the first time, since arriving at Westbrook Academy, Mason began to consider the possibility that he didn't have to face this battle alone. Principal Eleanor Wright was not easily surprised after 25 years in education, but the sight of Mason Collins and his mother sitting in her office waiting area alongside Lily Chen and her father, tech mogul James Chen, was genuinely unexpected. Even more surprising was the presence of two other sets of parents she recognized as belonging to Westbrook's wealthy elite, their children fidgeting nervously beside them. "They all arrived within 10 minutes of each other," her assistant whispered. "They've asked to speak with you as a group." Eleanor checked her watch. She had cleared her morning schedule for her meeting with Diane Collins, but hadn't anticipated an impromptu coalition. "Show them in," she decided, curiosity overriding her usual protocols. Diane Collins entered first, her Westbrook General Hospital scrubs visible beneath her coat, her hand protectively on Mason's shoulder. Despite her obvious exhaustion from an overnight shift, she carried herself with quiet dignity that immediately commanded respect. "Thank you for seeing us, Principal Wright," Diane began, once everyone had settled into the chairs hastily arranged in a circle. "I'm Mason's mother. After learning what my son has endured at Westbrook, I requested this meeting. These other parents and students asked to join us after hearing about the situation." James Chen spoke next, his Silicon Valley casual attire contrasting with the formal business wear of the other parents. "My daughter Lily told me about what she witnessed in the cafeteria and about the ongoing pattern of harassment Mason has experienced. As a board member, I'm deeply concerned both about the bullying itself and about Richard Prescott's reaction to your handling of it." Eleanor maintained her professional composure despite her surprise. James Chen was one of Westbrook's newer board members, having joined after making a substantial donation to fund the school's technology center. His support could be significant in the coming confrontation with Prescott. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Chen. As you may know, I've implemented disciplinary measures consistent with our code of conduct, which Mr. Prescott is now challenging. He's called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow night," confirmed Patricia Harrington, mother of 6th grader Emma. "My husband is on the board. Richard is reportedly demanding your removal for overstepping authority and creating unnecessary discord in the Westbrook community." Diane Collins' expression hardened. "So protecting my son from abuse is considered unnecessary discord? What exactly is Westbrook teaching these children about power and accountability?" The blunt question hung in the air, uncomfortable but undeniably valid. Eleanor seized the opening. "That's precisely the issue at stake here. Beyond this specific incident, I've become concerned about a culture at Westbrook that seems to privilege wealth and status over character and conduct." "It's not just Mason," Lily Chen said suddenly, her confident voice surprising from a 12-year-old. "Zachary and his friends target anyone they consider beneath them." Kaylee Rodriguez left last semester because of their bullying about her accent. "Devin Williams gets mocked constantly because his family isn't as rich as the others, even though they're not on scholarship." The other students nodded in confirmation, adding their own observations about Westbrook's hierarchical social dynamics. Mason remained silent, appearing overwhelmed by this unexpected show of support. "Why haven't these incidents been reported?" Eleanor asked, directing her question to both students and parents. "Would it have made a difference?" responded Michael Foster, father of 7th grader Ethan. "Everyone knows the Prescotts essentially own Westbrook. Faculty and administrators have typically looked the other way." "The implicit criticism was fair," Eleanor acknowledged silently. Institutional change started at the top, and previous leadership had clearly allowed problematic dynamics to flourish. "Things are different now," she stated firmly. "I cannot change the past culture of Westbrook, but I can assure you that under my leadership, all students will be held to the same standards of behavior, regardless of their family's financial status or influence." Diane Collins leaned forward, her exhaustion momentarily eclipsed by determination. "Words are easy, Principal Wright. What concrete actions are you taking to protect my son and other targeted students from further harassment?" It was a fair challenge. "Immediately, I've assigned additional staff to monitor common areas where bullying typically occurs. I've initiated mandatory training for all faculty on recognizing and addressing bullying behaviors. And I'm implementing a documented reporting system to ensure incidents are properly tracked and addressed." "And Zachary Prescott?" Diane pressed. "What consequences will he actually face?" "His 3-day suspension stands, despite his father's objections. He'll also be required to attend counseling sessions addressing his behavior." Eleanor paused. "However, I must be transparent. Mr. Prescott is actively working to overturn these measures and potentially remove me from my position." James Chen exchanged glances with the other parents. "That's partly why we're here. We believe Westbrook needs leadership willing to challenge the status quo, even when it's uncomfortable. We intend to support your position at tomorrow's board meeting." This unexpected alliance gave Eleanor cautious hope. Richard Prescott wielded enormous influence, but a unified group of prominent families might provide enough counterbalance to protect both her position and the changes she hoped to implement. "What can we do to help?" Patricia Harrington asked, looking around the circle. "As parents, as board members, as members of the Westbrook community?" The meeting transformed into a strategy session. James Chen would rally support among newer board members less beholden to Prescott's old money influence. Patricia and Michael would document their children's experiences with Zachary's group to establish a pattern of behavior. Lily and the other students would provide written statements about what they had witnessed. Throughout the discussion, Mason remained mostly silent, watching with a mixture of disbelief and cautious hope, as these influential adults and their children rallied around him. When there was finally a lull in the conversation, he spoke up, his voice quiet but steady. "Why are you all doing this? Most of you don't even know me." The room fell silent, his simple question cutting through the tactical planning to the more fundamental issue at stake. It was Ethan Foster who answered first, surprising everyone. The normally reserved 7th grader looked directly at Mason. "Because I was too scared to help before. I watched Zachary and his friends be cruel to you and others, and I never said anything." "That makes me part of the problem." Lily nodded in agreement. "Westbrook is supposed to be about excellence. But what's excellent about letting people be bullied just because they don't have as much money? It's hypocritical." James Chen placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder, pride evident in his expression. "My family came to this country with nothing. I built my company from zero because I had opportunities based on merit, not background. When Lily told me what's happening here, I realized Westbrook isn't living up to the meritocracy it claims to be." Diane Collins looked around the circle, her expression softening slightly. "Thank you, all of you. Mason deserved better than what he's experienced here." As the meeting concluded with concrete plans for the board showdown, Mason found Lily waiting for him in the hallway while their parents continued talking. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "a lot of kids at Westbrook are fed up with Zachary's crowd. They've just been too intimidated to say anything. That's changing now. Mason studied her, trying to reconcile this unexpected alliance with his previous isolation. "Why did you speak up in the cafeteria that day? You could have just looked away like everyone else." Lily considered the question seriously. "My grandmother used to say that character is revealed by what you do when it costs you something. That day in the cafeteria, I finally understood what she meant." As Mason walked back to class, flanked by Lily and Ethan in a show of solidarity that would have been unimaginable days earlier, he felt something unfamiliar growing within him. Not just hope, but a dawning recognition of his own worth beyond academic achievement. Perhaps belonging at Westbrook wasn't about wealth or status after all, but about finding the courage to stand for something more important than social hierarchies. For the first time since arriving at the prestigious academy, Mason Collins walked the hallways with his head held high. Richard Prescott didn't like losing. He hadn't built his investment empire by accepting defeat, and he certainly wouldn't let a self-righteous principal undermine his authority at Westbrook Academy. The emergency board meeting he'd called for tomorrow evening would settle this matter decisively. Eleanor Wright would learn that crossing the Prescott family had consequences. He placed his crystal tumbler of scotch on his home office desk and studied the dossier his private investigator had compiled on Principal Wright. There was nothing particularly damning. Her record was frustratingly spotless, but everyone had pressure points. Hers appeared to be a deep commitment to educational equity, a quaint notion that had no place at an institution like Westbrook. His phone buzzed with an incoming text from fellow board member Harold Vanderbilt. "Just got call from James Chen. He's gathering support for Wright. Says 6 board members already committed to backing her." Richard's jaw tightened. Chen was an irritating newcomer, all tech money and progressive ideas, with no appreciation for Westbrook's traditions. Still, 6 board members was concerning, only 4 short of a majority that could block Richard's motion to terminate Wright's contract. "Call an emergency strategy session," he instructed his assistant. "My house tonight, 8 p.m. Invitation only. Bradford, Vanderbilt, the Whitmore twins, and Matthews. No electronic communications about the agenda." The core old guard of Westbrook's board would help him quash this rebellion. They understood what was at stake, not just his son's discipline record, but the very nature of Westbrook itself. If scholarship students could challenge the established order without consequences, what was next? Admission based purely on merit rather than legacy and donation size? Unthinkable. Across town in their modest apartment, Mason watched his mother pace the small living room, phone pressed to her ear. Diane Collins had transformed from exhausted hospital worker to fierce advocate in the span of 24 hours, reaching out to every contact she had for advice on navigating the upcoming board confrontation. "Yes, I understand the Prescotts are powerful," she was saying, her free hand gesturing emphatically, though the caller couldn't see it. "But this isn't about money or influence. It's about my son's right to an education free from harassment." Mason felt a complicated mixture of emotions: pride in his mother's determination, anxiety about the escalating situation, and lingering guilt about the trouble he'd caused. When Diane finally ended the call, she sat beside him on their worn sofa with a tired smile. "That was Sarah Williams, Devin's mom," she explained. "They're joining us at the board meeting tomorrow. And she put me in touch with a reporter from the City Tribune who covers education issues." Mason's eyes widened. "A reporter? Mom, is that a good idea? What about my scholarship?" Diane squeezed his hand reassuringly. "Right now, we're just gathering allies and options. But Mason, you need to understand something important. No scholarship is worth your dignity or safety. If Westbrook won't protect you, we'll find another path." Her certainty both comforted and terrified him. Westbrook, for all its challenges, represented his clearest path to the future he'd dreamed of: top college, medical school, becoming a doctor. The public high school in their district had metal detectors at the entrances, and a graduation rate below 60%. "But my education," he began. "Will continue one way or another," Diane finished firmly. "There are other private schools with scholarship programs. There are specialized public academies. We have options, Mason. What we won't do is let you continue in an environment where you're targeted for not being wealthy enough." Before Mason could respond, his phone chimed with a text notification. It was from Lily. "Emergency meeting at the Chen house tonight. Can you come? My dad's sending a car." Meanwhile, at Westbrook Academy, Eleanor Wright was working late, meticulously documenting every aspect of the Zachary Prescott incident and her subsequent investigation. She had no illusions about Richard Prescott's intentions for tomorrow's board meeting. He aimed to make an example of her, to demonstrate the consequences of challenging his authority. A knock at her office door interrupted her focus. Andrea Winters, Mason's English teacher, entered with a folder in hand. "I've been meaning to give you this," Andrea said, placing the folder on Eleanor's desk. "It's a collection of incidents involving Zachary Prescott and his friends that I've witnessed or had reported to me over the past 2 years." Eleanor opened the folder to find detailed notes, dates, and descriptions. "You've been documenting this all along?" Andrea nodded, looking both determined and slightly ashamed. "But I never felt empowered to act under the previous administration. Everyone knew the Prescotts were untouchable." She hesitated before adding, "I'm not the only one. At least 5 other teachers have similar records. We're all willing to speak at the board meeting if needed." This unexpected show of faculty support gave Eleanor renewed hope. The culture of silence that had protected Zachary and his friends was beginning to crack from multiple directions. By 8 o'clock that evening, 2 very different meetings were underway across the city. At Richard Prescott's mansion, 7 men in expensive suits sat in leather armchairs, drinking fine scotch and strategizing how to maintain the status quo that had served them so well. They reviewed board bylaws, seeking procedural advantages, identified members who might be susceptible to pressure, and discussed veiled threats about future donations. Their confidence was absolute. They had weathered challenges to their authority before and emerged victorious each time. "Wright is simply naive," Harold Vanderbilt opined, swirling his scotch. "She doesn't understand how the real world works. Institutions like Westbrook have hierarchies for a reason." Richard Prescott nodded in agreement. "Exactly. Not everyone is meant for leadership. Some are meant to follow, a lesson this Collins boy and his mother apparently need to learn." Meanwhile, in James Chen's modernist home overlooking the city, a strikingly different gathering had formed. Mason and Diane Collins sat somewhat uncomfortably in the spacious living room alongside 4 other Westbrook families, including Lily's, Chen and her father. They were joined by Andrea Winters and 2 other teachers who had arrived discreetly, concerned about potential repercussions, but determined to take a stand. What we're facing tomorrow isn't just about one incident or one. Student James Chen explained, standing before the assembled group. "It's about the soul of Westbrook Academy. Are we an institution that exists to perpetuate privilege, or one that genuinely develops character and intellect in all our students, regardless of their background?" Mason listened in amazement as these influential parents and dedicated teachers discussed strategies for confronting the board's old guard. They reviewed documented incidents of bullying, prepared statements about Westbrook's toxic social hierarchy, and discussed potential media involvement if the board failed to uphold Principal Wright's decision. What struck him most was how his individual experience had catalyzed something larger, a movement to address systemic problems that had been festering beneath Westbrook's prestigious veneer for years. "I don't understand," he whispered to Lily, who had settled beside him on the couch. "Why is everyone willing to fight so hard over this?" "It's just me and Zachary," Lily shook her head. "It stopped being just about you two the moment Principal Wright took a stand. Now it's about what kind of school Westbrook really is and what kind of people we want to be. As the strategy session continued, Mason felt something shift within him. For months, he had viewed himself as an outsider at Westbrook, someone merely tolerated because of his academic abilities. Now he realized he might represent something essential to the school's future, a test of its stated values versus its actual practices. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Opening it, he froze at the message. "Back off if you know what's good for you. Scholarship kids who make trouble don't last long at Westbrook." He should have been frightened by the obvious threat. Instead, Mason felt an unexpected surge of determination. If Westbrook was worth fighting for, and these unexpected allies suggested it might be, then perhaps it was time he joined the battle, not just as a victim seeking protection, but as someone actively working to create change. Zachary Prescott returned to Westbrook Academy the morning of the board meeting, strutting through the hallways as if his 3-day absence had been a vacation rather than a suspension. His friends gathered around him immediately, eager to hear about his forced break and his father's plans to fix the situation. "Principal Wright is toast," Zachary announced loudly near the 6th grade lockers, deliberately within Mason's earshot. "My dad's calling a board vote tonight. By tomorrow, she'll be updating her resume." Mason pretended to focus on gathering his books, but his stomach knotted with anxiety. Despite the unexpected alliance that had formed around him, Richard Prescott's influence at Westbrook remained formidable. The thought of Principal Wright losing her position because she'd defended him was almost unbearable. "Don't worry about the scholarship freak," Zachary continued, his voice carrying clearly down the hallway. "Once Wright is gone, things will get back to normal around here. The new principal will understand how Westbrook really works." "You mean your dad will make sure they do?" Jason added with a laugh. Mason closed his locker and turned to leave, determined not to engage. As he walked away, he heard Zachary call after him. "Hey, Collins, enjoy your charity education while it lasts." The taunt was familiar, but something about it struck Mason differently today. Perhaps it was the growing awareness that he wasn't alone in this fight, or perhaps it was simple fatigue with Zachary's persistent cruelty. Whatever the reason, Mason stopped walking and turned back. "What exactly is your problem with me, Zachary?" he asked, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Is it that I get better grades than you without having a private tutor? Or that I actually earned my place here instead of having my dad buy it?" A hush fell over the hallway. Students froze, textbooks clutched to chests, eyes wide at this unprecedented confrontation. Zachary's face flushed with angry surprise. Mason Collins had never fought back before. "You think you're so special because you can memorize textbooks," Zachary sneered, recovering quickly. "But you'll always be trash. Your mom cleans bedpans for a living. You live in a dump. You don't belong here, and everyone knows it." The familiar insult still stung, but Mason held his ground. "My mom helps sick people and works harder than your dad ever has, and at least she raised me to treat people with respect, not to be a bully who needs daddy to fix his problems." Zachary's expression darkened dangerously. "You have no idea who you're messing with. My father practically owns this school. One phone call from him, and your precious scholarship disappears." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," Mason replied. "A coward who thinks money makes him better than everyone else." A collective gasp rippled through the growing audience of students. No one had ever spoken to Zachary Prescott this way. The wealthy boy's face contorted with rage as he stepped toward Mason menacingly. "You're dead, Collins. When my dad finishes with Principal Wright tonight, you're next. We'll make sure—" "Zachary!" Lily Chen's voice cut through the tension as she pushed through the crowd, phone in hand. "You might want to stop talking now." Zachary glanced at her with irritation. "Stay out of this, Lily. It doesn't concern you." Lily held up her phone, its screen displaying a recording app with a timer running. "Actually, I think the board might be very interested in hearing exactly what you just said about your father fixing things and making Mason's scholarship disappear." The blood drained from Zachary's face as he realized his threats had been captured. "Give me that phone," he demanded, reaching for it. Lily stepped back quickly. "I've already sent the recording to my father and to Principal Wright. Maybe you should call your dad and let him know his plans aren't as private as he thought." Zachary looked around wildly, noting how many students had witnessed his humiliation. Without another word, he shoved past the crowd and stormed away, his friends trailing uncertainly behind him. The hallway erupted in excited whispers as Lily approached Mason. "You okay?" she asked quietly. Mason nodded, still processing what had just happened. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet," Lily replied. "This just made tonight's board meeting even more complicated." By lunchtime, the recording had spread throughout Westbrook's student body. Versions with varying fidelity circulated via text messages and social media, each sharing the same damning content. Zachary Prescott explicitly stating his father's intention to remove Principal Wright and threatening Mason's scholarship. So, the faculty lounge, teachers huddled around Andrea Winter's phone, listening to the clearest version of the recording with expressions ranging from shock to vindication. "This confirms what we've suspected for years," history teacher Michael Benson said, shaking his head. "Prescott doesn't just donate to Westbrook. He expects to control it, including who gets disciplined and who doesn't. The question is whether it will make any difference tonight," Andrea replied. "Richard Prescott still has significant influence with the board." As lunch period ended, Principal Wright called Mason to her office. He found her reviewing documents with James Chen, both looking up when he entered. "Mason," Eleanor began carefully, "I understand there was an incident in the hallway this morning involving Zachary Prescott." Mason nodded, suddenly concerned he might be in trouble for the confrontation. "I shouldn't have engaged with him. I'm sorry if I made things worse." "On the contrary," James Chen said, "Zachary's recorded threats have provided exactly the evidence we needed. The fact that he explicitly connected his father's board influence to your scholarship status demonstrates a pattern of attempted interference that goes beyond this single disciplinary issue." Eleanor nodded in agreement. "Several board members who were on the fence have contacted me after hearing the recording. They're concerned about potential liability if it appears Westbrook allows wealthy families to target scholarship students with impunity." The conversation was interrupted by Eleanor's assistant, who entered with an expression of barely contained excitement. "Principal Wright, there's a reporter from the City Tribune here. She's requesting a comment on what she's calling the Westbrook bullying scandal." Eleanor and James exchanged alarmed glances. "How did this reach the media already?" she asked. "The recording has gone beyond Westbrook," her assistant explained. "Apparently, someone sent it to the education reporter with additional context about ongoing bullying of scholarship students." While the adults discussed this new development, Mason's phone buzzed with texts from his mother. "Reporter called me for comment about recording. Called several other Westbrook parents too. What's happening?" By the time final bell rang, what had begun as a private school disciplinary matter had transformed into a potential public relations crisis. Local news vans had appeared outside Westbrook's gates, reporters attempting to interview departing students about the class warfare allegedly taking place inside the prestigious academy. Richard Prescott, arriving early for the evening's board's meeting, found himself ambushed by journalists asking pointed questions about his son's behavior and his own influence over school disciplinary procedures. His characteristic composure slipped momentarily as cameras captured his angry dismissal of their questions. Inside the administrative building, Eleanor Wright prepared for the most significant confrontation of her professional career. The stack of documented bullying incidents provided by faculty members sat on her desk alongside the student statements gathered by James Chen and the other supportive parents. The viral recording of Zachary's threats had unexpectedly shifted the balance of power, but Richard Prescott remained a formidable opponent with decades of accumulated influence. As board members began arriving for the emergency meeting, Eleanor noticed something remarkable. Rather than entering through the private back entrance typically used for sensitive discussions, many were coming through the main doors past the assembled media. Their expressions suggested they understood that Westbrook Academy now faced public scrutiny beyond their controlled boardroom environment. For better or worse, the truth about Westbrook's culture was emerging into the light. The question now was whether the institution would acknowledge and address that truth or attempt to bury it beneath layers of privilege and tradition. The Westbrook Academy board meeting lasted until nearly midnight. Outside in the parking lot, parents and reporters waited in the cold, speculating about the heated discussions taking place behind closed doors. Inside, the battle for Westbrook's future unfolded in measured tones that barely concealed the passionate convictions beneath. Richard Prescott had arrived prepared for his usual performance, confident assertions backed by implied financial threats. What he hadn't anticipated was walking into a room where nearly half the board members had already heard Zachary's recorded threats and witnessed his own confrontation with reporters outside. This isn't about one disciplinary incident, James Chen had argued, his tech entrepreneur directness cutting through Prescott's procedural objections. It's about whether Westbrook enforces its code of conduct equally for all students, regardless of their family's financial contributions. By the time witness testimony began, teachers documenting years of overlooked bullying, students describing the toxic social hierarchy, parents expressing concern about institutional values, Prescott's usual allies had grown noticeably quiet. The final vote, when it came, wasn't even close, 14-7 in support of Principal Wright, with one abstention. 2 weeks after that pivotal night, Mason walked through Westbrook's hallways experiencing a school subtly but significantly transformed. The most visible change was the newly established Community Standards Council, a group comprising students, parents, and faculty tasked with reviewing disciplinary issues and ensuring consistent enforcement of school policies regardless of a student's background. Less visible but equally important were the curriculum additions focusing on empathy, diversity, and ethical leadership. Every Westbrook student now participated in weekly advisory sessions addressing these topics, sessions that deliberately mixed students across grade levels and socioeconomic backgrounds. "It's weird seeing Zachary in the peer mediation program," Lily commented as she and Mason headed to lunch. "He actually had to facilitate a conflict resolution session for 6th graders yesterday." Zachary Prescott's transformation had been perhaps the most surprising development. After the board meeting, his father had reportedly given him 2 options: transfer to military school or accept Westbrook's new disciplinary framework, which included extensive community service and required participation in the peer mediation program. To everyone's shock, Zachary had chosen to stay. "I heard his dad was furious," Mason replied, "especially after he resigned from the board." Richard Prescott's departure from Westbrook leadership had made headlines in local business circles. His public statement cited increased professional commitments, but everyone knew the truth. For the first time in decades, the Prescott family no longer controlled Westbrook Academy. In the cafeteria, Mason noticed another significant change. The rigid social groupings that had once defined Westbrook lunch periods had begun to dissolve. While friend groups still existed, the invisible but impenetrable boundaries between them had softened. Scholarship students no longer sat isolated, in corners. Zachary's former entourage had dispersed, some seeking new social connections, others maintaining quieter versions of their previous relationships. Mason set his tray down at a table where Lily sat with Ethan Foster and 2 other students. he was still getting to know. No one remarked on his presence. His right to join them was simply assumed. A small but meaningful shift from his previous isolation. "Did you finish the biology lab report?" Ethan asked as Mason settled into his seat. "I couldn't get my data to match the expected results." The conversation flowed naturally into academic territory, then detoured through upcoming school events, weekend plans, and the latest superhero movie. Normal adolescent topics, unmarked by the cruel status distinctions that had previously dominated. Westbrook's social interactions. Mason Collins? He looked up to find Principal Wright standing beside their table, her professional demeanor softened by a genuine smile. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" Following her to a quieter corner of the cafeteria, Mason felt a flicker of his old anxiety. Even after everything that had happened, being singled out by authority still triggered his defensive instincts. "I wanted to share some news with you before the official announcement," Principal Wright said. "The board has approved a significant expansion of our scholarship program for next academic year. We'll be doubling the number of full scholarships available and adding a mentoring component to help new students adjust to Westbrook." Mason absorbed this information, understanding its significance beyond the dry statistics. More students like him would have the opportunity for an excellent education without facing the isolation he had experienced. "That's great," he said sincerely. "It will make a real difference. We'd like you to consider being part of the mentoring program," Principal Wright continued. "Your perspective would be invaluable to incoming scholarship students." The request surprised him. Despite the recent changes, Mason still thought of himself as someone who had survived Westbrook rather than thrived within it. "You want me to be a mentor? I'm not sure I'm the right person." "On the contrary," Principal Wright replied, "you've demonstrated extraordinary resilience and integrity under difficult circumstances. More importantly, you've helped catalyze meaningful change in our community. Those are precisely the qualities we want our student leaders to embody." Student leader. The term felt foreign applied to himself, yet Mason couldn't deny that his role at Westbrook had fundamentally changed. Where he had once been defined by his scholarship status and economic background, he was now recognized for his character and academic abilities. "I'll think about it," he promised, genuinely considering the possibility rather than offering a polite deflection. Returning to his lunch table, Mason found the conversation had shifted to the upcoming student council elections. Lily was trying to convince Ethan to run for treasurer, while the others debated potential candidates for president. "What about you, Mason?" Lily asked suddenly. "You should run for something." 6 months ago, such a suggestion would have seemed absurd. Scholarship students didn't hold leadership positions at Westbrook. They kept their heads down and focused on academics. But the old unwritten rules were falling away, creating space for new possibilities. "Maybe next year," he replied, surprising himself with the response. Not a dismissal, but a deferral, an acknowledgement that such opportunities might actually be within his reach. After school, Mason found his mother waiting outside in their aging Honda, a rare occurrence since she usually worked during pickup time. Sliding into the passenger seat, he immediately noticed her barely contained excitement. "What's going on?" he asked as she pulled away from the curb. Diane Collins could no longer suppress her smile. "I got the promotion. Nursing supervisor for the entire East Wing. Better hours, significant pay increase, and actual healthcare management experience." "Mom, that's amazing," Mason exclaimed, genuinely thrilled for her. His mother had been pursuing this opportunity for months, taking extra certification courses during her minimal free time. "It means some changes for us," she continued, her voice more measured now. "I wanted to discuss them with you before making any decisions." Mason listened as she outlined possibilities. A slightly larger apartment closer to both Westbrook and the hospital, additional tutoring resources to support his academic goals, maybe even a used laptop to replace their shared desktop computer. Watching his mother's face as she described these modest improvements to their circumstances, Mason felt a surge of pride and determination. She had never stopped believing in him, had fought for his education, even when it seemed Westbrook might crush his spirit. Now, with her career advancing and Westbrook itself transforming, their shared dreams felt more attainable than ever. Whatever you decide is fine, he told her sincerely. Things are better at school now, really better, not just temporarily. Diane glanced at him, maternal intuition detecting the genuine change in his demeanor. You seem different, she observed, more confident. Mason considered this assessment, looking out at Westbrook's imposing gates, receding in the side mirror. I think I finally understand that I belong there, he said slowly. Not because of my grades or because they gave me a scholarship, but because I helped make it a better place. His mother reached across to squeeze his hand briefly before returning her attention to the road. No additional words were necessary. They both recognized that something fundamental had shifted. Westbrook Academy was changing, and so was Mason Collins, each transformation making the other possible. 6 months after the community forum, Westbrook Academy held its annual spring showcase, an event highlighting student achievements across academic disciplines, arts, and service initiatives. The main hallway had been transformed into a gallery of student projects, each display representing weeks of dedicated work and creative thinking. Mason stood beside his medical ethics presentation, answering questions from impressed parents and fellow students. His project examined disparities in healthcare access, inspired by his mother's experiences as a nursing supervisor and his own ambitions to become a doctor. Beside his research poster, a monitor played interviews he'd conducted with healthcare professionals serving underprivileged communities. This is remarkably sophisticated work for a 6th grader, commented Dr. Harrington, Emma's father, and a surgeon at University Hospital. Have you considered applying for the summer medical shadowing program? I'd be happy to recommend you. Mason thanked him sincerely, still adjusting to the reality that such opportunities were now genuinely available to him. Not theoretical possibilities, but concrete pathways toward his goals. The transformation in his Westbrook experience had been comprehensive, extending far beyond the end of Zachary's bullying to encompass new mentorships, academic connections, and genuine social integration. Across the hall, he spotted his mother, in animated conversation with James Chen and Principal Wright. Diane Collins no longer appeared out of place among Westbrook's parent community. Her healthcare expertise and perspective as a scholarship parent had proven valuable to the school's newly formed Inclusion Committee, where she served alongside some of the city's most influential citizens. Their living situation had improved modestly with Diane's promotion. They'd moved to a slightly larger apartment closer to Westbrook, and Mason now had his own desk and laptop for schoolwork. These changes, while significant to their daily comfort, were less important than the fundamental shift in how they experienced Westbrook itself. No longer as supplicants grateful for admission to an elite world, but as valued community members with meaningful contributions to make. Mason, Lily called, waving from her display on sustainable technology. Come see this. As he crossed the crowded hallway to join her, Mason navigated through a Westbrook that bore little resemblance to the stratified institution he'd entered last fall. Scholarship students participated actively in clubs and student government. Social groups formed around shared interests rather than family wealth. Teachers addressed problematic behavior consistently, regardless of a student's background. None of these changes had come easily. Resistance from traditionalists continued, with several families quietly withdrawing their children after declaring Westbrook too focused on social engineering rather than academic excellence. Richard Prescott had made good on his threats to redirect his considerable donations, creating a temporary budget shortfall that required creative solutions from the administration and board. Yet for each family that left, new ones arrived, attracted by Westbrook's evolving reputation as an academically rigorous school that also prioritized character development and genuine diversity. Applications for both regular admission and scholarships had increased dramatically, allowing the school to become more selective while simultaneously expanding its socioeconomic representation. "What do you think?" Lily asked, as Mason reached her display. It's a solar-powered water filtration system designed for rural communities without reliable electricity. The project exemplified Lily's particular genius, combining technological innovation with practical applications that addressed real-world problems. As she enthusiastically explained the engineering principles behind her design, Mason noticed Zachary Prescott watching from nearby, his expression thoughtful rather than hostile. The transformation in Zachary had surprised everyone. Without his father's overwhelming influence, the boy had gradually revealed unexpected dimensions, a talent for debate, a dry sense of humor, and occasionally genuine remorse for his previous behavior. He would never be Mason's close friend. Too much. History stood between them, but they had achieved a civil coexistence that sometimes verged on mutual respect. "Collins," Zachary acknowledged with a nod as their eyes met. "Chen, impressive projects, both of you." "Thanks," Mason replied, the exchange still feeling slightly surreal despite months of similar interactions. "Yours too," Zachary's economics. Project analyzing wealth distribution had raised eyebrows throughout Westbrook, not least because it critically examined the very privilege he had once wielded so callously. Some speculated this represented genuine growth. Others suggested it was merely strategic rehabilitation of his image. Whatever his motivations, the project demonstrated intellectual engagement with issues previously invisible to him. As the showcase continued, Principal Wright gathered everyone for a brief address. Standing on a small platform in the main hall, she surveyed the diverse gathering of students, parents, and faculty with evident satisfaction. "This showcase exemplifies what education at its best can achieve," she began. "Not just academic excellence, though that's abundantly evident in these impressive projects, but the development of young people who think critically, care deeply, and contribute meaningfully to their communities," she continued, acknowledging both Westbrook's proud traditions and its necessary evolution. "Institutions, like individuals, must grow and adapt. The Westbrook Academy you see today honors our history while embracing positive change. Every student's voice matters here. Every family's contribution, whether financial, cultural, or perspective-based, enriches our community." Mason listened attentively, recognizing how different this inclusive vision was from the Westbrook he'd entered as a scholarship student. Principal Wright had risked her career to defend a fundamental principle that education should be a pathway to opportunity for all students, not a mechanism for reinforcing existing privileges. Her courage had catalyzed institutional transformation that benefited everyone, even those who had initially resisted it most strongly. After the formal presentations concluded, Mason helped his mother gather his project materials. As they packed up his display board, Diane spoke quietly so only he could hear. "I'm so proud of you, Mason. Not just for this project, though it's exceptional, but for how you've handled everything this year. You helped change Westbrook for the better." Mason considered this assessment, still uncomfortable with being viewed as any kind of catalyst for institutional reform. "I didn't really do anything special," he demurred. "Principal Wright was the one who took a stand because of what she witnessed happening to you," Diane reminded him gently. "Sometimes change requires both someone willing to speak truth to power and someone brave enough to share their experience. You were that brave person, Mason." As they carried his materials toward the exit, Mason found himself reflecting on the journey from that first humiliating day in the cafeteria to this moment of belonging and recognition. The path had been neither straight nor easy, involving painful confrontations, public scrutiny, and the challenging work of building a more equitable community. Yet, the outcome, a Westbrook where academic excellence and human dignity were equally valued, seemed worth every difficult step. Outside, spring sunshine bathed the campus in golden light. Students and families lingered on the lawn, reluctant to end the showcase celebration. Mason spotted Lily and her father near the science building, Zachary talking with Principal Wright by the main steps, Emma and her parents walking toward the parking lot, individual threads in Westbrook's rewovens. Social fabric, ready to go home? Diane asked, car keys in hand. Mason nodded, taking one last look at the school that had become, against all odds, a place where he truly belonged. "Yeah," he said, "I'm ready." As they walked toward their car, Mason realized something profound had shifted within him over these transformative months. He had arrived at Westbrook believing his only value lay in academic achievement, that his scholarship status made him perpetually indebted and inherently less worthy than his wealthy classmates. Now he understood that dignity wasn't something to be earned through perfect grades or granted by institutional benevolence. It was his birthright as a human being, as it was for every student at Westbrook Academy. That understanding, more than any policy change or disciplinary action, represented Westbrook's most significant transformation and his own.